Testing, testing. Hello. Hey, everybody. Give you all a couple of minutes to fill in tonight, and we're going to have a fun conversation about microplastics. There's a lot of toxins that we are coming in contact with every day, and microplastics are chief among them. Seems like there's hardly anywhere that you can even go without being inundated with plastic. So I'll be answering any questions that y'all have tonight. No audio's coming through. Okay. Just a second. We're going to check and see if we have an issue with audio. Sounds fine on my end, but we'll check and see. Yeah, we'll take a quick look and see here. Well, while we're finishing that, again, if you have any questions, feel free. Okay, good. I've seen that people can hear me, so we're going to go ahead and jump into it tonight. I'm going to try to keep it a little bit shorter. I know that we can go really, really long, but we're going to try to shorten this up a little bit. Microplastics, you're finally hearing a lot more about these toxins recently. Just about anywhere you turn in the news, you'll see people starting to talk about them. And I want to shed a little bit of light on not only what they are, but what we can do about them. Because, like most things in the health space, you hear a lot of fear, terror, doom, and gloom when it comes to all of these things that are stressing our body, all these things that are, in effect, slowly killing us or at least poisoning us. Nobody ever talks about solutions to get rid of them. And if you never hear anybody talk about how to get rid of them, pretty soon you can end up having people at large never even asking that question in and of themselves. And I think that's where we see ourselves a lot today in general with health is everybody knows we're getting sick, but nobody's ever asking the question, well, how do I turn this around? How do I fix this? And plastics are, just one of the many toxic substances that I see a lot of folks talk about, or a lot of news outlets, publish that this is a big problem, and nowhere do I ever really see a solution. Usually there may be some token, um, not even really to natural health. Usually it's maybe there's some type of drug, or maybe there's something that's coming up in the pharmaceutical world, but there's not really much there. And even in the natural health space, I don't hear many people talking about this. So we're going to get into what you absolutely can do. Microplastics are something that I regularly detox out of people, just as a matter of course when working with them. But they're everywhere. So let's take a look at them and see what all the fuss is about with microplastics. Um, so they come from a specific category of chemicals. In fact, let me see if I can find it for you, because there's more than just one. It's almost like an umbrella term. So there are the plastics themselves, or we call plasticizers. These are called phthalates, but you can also add in other things into there as well, such as, um, in fact, give me a second. I had it just right here. Here we go. So we got the phthalates out of plasticizers. We have bisphenols. Most of y'all probably know that by the term BPA. Whenever you see BPA free, uh, on cans, then that's what they're referring to. You even have things like flame retardants, even heavy metals that are used as like stabilizers. And then there's the big term, the PFAS, the forever chemicals that people know as either perfluoroalkyl substances or polyfluoroalkyl substances. So, yes, you've got the actual plastic itself, and then you kind of have the other things that go hand in hand with those for whatever the manufacturing intent is. But they're everywhere. You think about the cellophane or the saran wrap, as most people call it, that's wrapped on a lot of your food. Even if you go and buy some clean cuts of beef, chances are it's going to be wrapped in plastic. You've got styrofoam tray, you've got the little plastic liquid absorber that's under it, and then of course it's wrapped in there. Uh, you're not going to get away from plastic; it's everywhere. So it's in the food that we eat. It's certainly in the water that we drink. It's in the air that we breathe. We're getting inundated with it. And if you're not working on your, we'll just say, if you're not supporting your body's natural elimination pathways and doing a little bit extra, doing active detox, you're going to get full of plastics. It's just going to happen. And I see that a lot on the testing that we do. I'll get into the testing later on, but since this talk is about giving answers to this, is not just talking about, here's all the bad problems with plastics. We're going to talk about the answers. And the good thing is we actually have tests. So I like people to know we can actually test for this. We can see how bad it is. And then we can run that test pre and post programs to see how much of that stuff is removing out of your system. And not only do people feel a lot better, but then they can also see that a lot of these plastics that correlate with many symptoms, and a lot of these symptoms could be very severe. We're going to be talking about heart disease. We're going to talk about neurological functions, whether it's dementia or tremors or digestive issues, neuropathy. Some very serious illnesses we can see are actually attributed to these chemicals. And again, people feel a lot better whenever they get this stuff out of their system. You feel better, your energy's better, you sleep better. So, with all of that being said, let's just kind of go through a high level overview of what we're going to hit tonight. So, microplastics, they've been found in every single organ system. I know a lot of the headlines that have come out recently talk about how much microplastics are in the brain. There's also nanoplastic as well. So, I'm whatever I say about microplastics is going to apply to nanoplastics as well. We can detox those things out. They're just a lot tinier, so that means they can get into a lot more places because of how small they are. But they're in the brain, they're in the arteries, they're in the reproductive organs for sure, and these concentrations are rising exponentially. Now, the way that they end up harming us, there's kind of like three main areas I categorize them into. There's physical irritations. There is a chemical kind of toxicity where it can actually, damage our mitochondria. It can damage our cell walls. It can end up damaging the organs. It can plug up. It can clog up certain pathways. And then also, it'll end up disrupting the microbes that live within inside us. So, plastics in the gut can cause huge problems in your microbiome, which, remember, the microbiome controls your immune function, it controls your digestive function, it controls. It has its hand in just about every function inside of your body. The microbiome is so important. And as I just said, it's in the air, the water, and the food. Those are all things that get down into your digestive tract. You're breathing it in constantly. This will poison and pollute the oral microbiome. So those poisons are going to irritate bacteria, and that can lead to your own suite of oral health challenges, and whether it's gingivitis, periodontal disease, root canals, insert any type of dental issue, And it's because those poisons are damaging not only the tissues in your mouth and then getting pushed into your cardiovascular system, as many things, as many problems in the mouth will end up in the cardiovascular system. But we have to remember too that the microbes that live inside of us, these are poisons to them too, and they're either going to feed on it and try to metabolize it, or at the very least it's polluting the home that, their homes that they live in, and it's going to cause them to go on the defense. And we've got a lot of journals now that are publishing information about this. Toxicology is kind of seen, the way I like to look at it, toxins in terms of the medical, the Western allopathic medical system. Toxicology kind of seems like the redheaded stepchild locked in the basement. There are studies on toxicity and what it does to folks. We know about it, whether it's mycotoxins, heavy metals, and whatnot, but it really never gets considered in terms of people's health unless somebody's had like an acute exposure, or there's been like a factory that's gone up in smoke and it's polluting the immediate environment. Sure, but a lot of these things, they accumulate over time, and a lot of the end stage illnesses that we get, we don't attribute them to plastics or environmental toxins in general, when in reality they are the oftentimes they are the main causes. They're the main drivers of the illnesses that we see manifest, or at the very least they play a very significant role with other things such as uh, traumas, whether physical or emotional, and infections. Anyway, you end up getting a toxic soup. But I bring that up to say that um, there is research. It's not like we don't know the effects of many of these things. They may not be as well funded as some of the other research out there, but we do have journal entries like the 2024 New England Journal of Medicine study. And this one found that people with microplastics, they're in their arterial plaque, and they have a 5.5 times higher risk of a heart attack, stroke, or death. Now, that sounds pretty significant too when you consider that, what is it, heart disease is still, or heart disease is still the number one killer of people in America. Well, if it's so high and we're finding plastics in the arterial plaque, you have to wonder, is there a correlation? We could get into that. I tend to think that there's a reason that the body plaques. Partly it's to fill all the micro tears that happen in the cardiovascular system, kind of like patching a pothole. Your body's supposed to come back later and actually fill all that in, fill instead of just having a temporary fix like a pothole or filling a pothole. It'll actually come in and rebuild that road, that proverbial road, properly. But we're Americans. Between the standard American diet and all the toxins, nothing's getting repaired. It's all patchwork. But I will say that there may be something to be said about microplastics and as a toxin in general, and the body putting down certain types of plaque as a means to try to wall, bind, and sequester poisons. So there might be something there. I mean, obviously something is driving the plaquing, and I'm not convinced that it's cholesterol. Considering that cholesterol is absolutely needed for a healthy brain, healthy hormone functions, and many other things. So we do have an interesting thing I want to get into too. This is going to be part of the solutions, but just note probiotics themselves, certain strains actually do have the ability to break down plastics. And that makes sense because, as I said, what happens when a toxin comes into the environment is you have your bacteria, your fungi, and your parasites that pleomorph. It's just a fancy way for saying that they are able to change the function and form in order uh, in response to their environment. And what do they do in nature? They break down materials so that the soil, in this case, that soil would be just our internal and terrain, can become healthier. So I say a lot of times we get caught in the crossfire as they're doing their job. But there are certain probiotics. We do carry these probiotics. We do have protocols for them, and I'll be sure to mention that at the end. If you want to get some of these yourselves, then start doing that. And where will we be without talking about drainage? So I'm going to go over some specific things we can do with drainage. Because I will just say this is that the body can get rid of a lot of stuff on its own if you keep it clean and open and running correctly. In this case, most people aren't. So we're going to talk about how we can help you kind of open those drainage pathways, what type of targeted tools of support that you can do in order to start making a dent in these microplastics. So when I say that they're everywhere, I mean that they're everywhere. They've been found on Mount Everest, and they've been found all the way down in the deepest trenches in the ocean that we can explore. They're in the Arctic ice. They're definitely in the blood of newborns, and that's kind of scary thinking about that. But a lot of people don't know that mothers detox into their children. It's very interesting, especially with the firstborn. The firstborn usually gets the brunt of all the mama's toxins. Um, I'm quoting from memory, so I could be wrong on here, but the average number of toxins found in newborns today, I think it's 287. That's ridiculous. But what that tells you is that the baby's being built with inferior parts. And we wonder why our children are getting sicker and sicker at younger ages with more end stage diseases and other diseases that were previously unknown to man 100, years ago. Plastics play a huge part in that because plastics are everywhere. And so, we can look back at the history of microplastics or just plastics in general. They were invented early 1900s. Mass producing started, we'll say after World War II, and it definitely has its uses. I mean, don't get me wrong. Plastics have made things a lot easier for us to live. So they're durable, it's lightweight, flexible. They're really cheap, and it kind of comes at a cost. One of those costs is the fact that means if it's durable, well, in this case, microplastics don't exactly break down. Remember, I just mentioned some of these classifications are forever chemicals, those PFAS that people are so worried about and that are so toxic. And since they don't break down, they're we can call them like persistent pollutants in the environment. So they're not biodegradable. They're not photodegradable, meaning that light doesn't necessarily break them down. It'll break into smaller and smaller and smaller fragments if you put it under things like UV light or heat or mechanical stress. But the polymer chains that it's made of, they still remain intact. So it's a pretty durable, resistant thing, even down to the base level. And that can end up meaning that they are very toxic to individuals. Now, where are we going to find these? Because as I'm talking about this, I mean, we see plastics are everywhere, but I am going to list off a few things. We got bottled water. Usually say too that the more malleable the plastic is, the easier that it can leach. So it's hard enough drinking water out of a container, out of a plastic container. That's kind of just like the devil that we have to deal with. But the harder the plastic, at least the less likely it is to leach. Never leave plastics that you're going to be consuming out of in cars in heat. You're asking for things to leach out of the bottle uh, into the liquid or into the food itself. That's just going to happen. But we got bottled water. Unfortunately, plastics are going to run off into the water supply, so it's going to be in the tap water. You've probably seen those floating garbage in the ocean. There's a lot of plastic in seafood, unfortunately, because the oceans are polluted. You're going to find plastic in table salt. You can find it in honey. You'll find it in beer. You'll find it even on fresh fruits. because it's getting into the groundwater. It's just getting everywhere. Also, a lot of these foods too, they're packaged in what? They're packaged in plastic. You go buy seafood from the freezer section, wasn't it? It's one of those hard plastic, um, kind of freezer or yeah, freezer burn resistant bags. It's all plastic. It's all plastic. And let's just kind of hit a couple of things too here with air, because we know it's like, well, how are we getting it in the air? One thing is either synthetic textiles or like microfibers, like the even the shirt that I'm wearing. Unless you're buying like 100% organic cotton or linen or some other natural fiber, chances are it's plastic. And as you sweat, I mean, it's going to rub off onto you. And as you sweat, it's going to open up your body to receive even more of it. So if you're sweating in your clothes and they're not made of natural fibers, you're going to be getting a little bit of that stuff in you. And so, like even your dryers, with every wash, every movement, all that lint and stuff that's kicking out, you walk beside somebody's house and you smell all that synthetic fragrance coming out of their dryer. You're not just smelling the um, what do they call that? Not the fabric softener, but like the dryer sheets. You're not just smelling the synthetic chemicals from there. You're also picking up little bits of the aerosolized lint. So, isn't that fun? Now we even have plastic on our cookware. I mean, how many times do you see? Uh, we could get into some stuff like nonstick pans. There are some of the things that go in plastic on that too, but just also think about too. Um, Again, with the food being wrapped in plastic, and you think about what that does. Um, when you start putting that on the pan and you start heating that up, you start cooking that into your food. Or if you've ever done like I have before, and you accidentally left a piece of plastic on the meat as it was coming out. Maybe it just didn't come out right. Maybe you've got the absorption pad underneath it, and you don't check it until you look around, and now you've cooked that plastic. You ruin a perfectly good piece of meat with high levels of plastic now in your food. It's not good. Now, unfortunately, you're going to find it in a bunch of personal care products. I'll just say makeup and cosmetics in general. There's a lot of nasty junk inside of there, and you're putting it on your skin, so it's absorbing into your pores. And whatever gets on your skin, it's called transdermal absorption, and it works. If a lot of hormones or a lot of hormone replacement therapy are made in creams, they absorb into your skin. If your skin was not absorbent, it would not work. So whatever you put on your skin, in a similar way, it's the same as you eating it. So when we're talking about like microbeads and certain exfoliants, there are plastic derived fragrances. Your air fresheners, your um, all those synthetic scents, and then even synthetic coatings that are just on within cosmetics in general. It pays it pays to buy real clean quality cosmetics. Otherwise, you're going to be paying for it in all sorts of health problems later on. And then finally, dust. I mean, you just have microplastics that are going to come off from everything that we buy, because everything we buy has usually has some type of plasticizer inside of it, and those are going to accumulate over time. And unfortunately, these particles that I just mentioned, they carry more than plastic. So we have well over 10,000 chemicals that are used within plastic manufacturing, and then roughly even 2/3 of them they've never been tested for safety. So a lot of these things we may have an idea, maybe they're potentially toxic, but we just don't know. I would err on the side of caution and say, yeah, these are really bad. But again, Where's the money to study them if it's not going to result in new drugs, or if it's going to cause certain industries to be liable for lawsuits that could break them, or criminally um, make them criminally liable in the millions or billions. There's just not that much incentive to do research, unfortunately. So, as I mentioned before, we're going to talk about where they're accumulating in the body in a little more depth. And we'll also talk about a couple publications that show what they found. But, we kind of had for years, there's this assumption that microplastics kind of just pass through the digestive system in one way and then out. And they never got further than that. But that is definitely not the case. They've been detected in at least 8 of the 12 major organ systems. And I'm pretty sure that those other ones that haven't been detected yet, I'm sure they're there. I have no doubt about it. So we already mentioned the cardiovascular system, digestive system, also the endocrine system. One thing I didn't mention about plastics, and this is big, a lot of these environmental chemicals in general are hormone mimickers. And a lot of them are specifically estrogen mimickers. And estrogen, especially in high levels, especially in men, it's not good. It's not good at all. It causes a lot of problems, a lot of reproductive problems in men and women. And we know that hormones are a very delicate balance. So when your hormone signals are off, they tend to not feel good. Either you don't have energy or you feel crazy. They've been found everywhere. So we find them in blood, we find them in urine, we find them in breast milk, we find them in semen, we find them in stool. And that would be the best place you want to find them because at least the body's excreting them. But you think about that in breast milk. So if they're found in breast milk, it means that the baby is inadvertently being fed plastic. So it's so important for people that are looking to get pregnant to go through detoxification programs first before they get pregnant for a couple of reasons. One, so they don't detox that stuff into the baby, because once you get pregnant, if you start trying to detox, it's not a good idea. You will start mobilizing a lot of toxins unnecessarily that are going to get into the baby or can get into the baby. And then after you get off of that, if you start detoxing yourself, they'll say you're going to be breastfeeding the baby at this, even after you, well, I'm saying even after you've given birth. Well, then you're going to be breastfeeding for a while, or you should be, because that is the best nutrition for a child. But if you start detoxing, then you're going to start releasing, or you're going to start accelerating the release of this stuff out of your system, and unfortunately get into the breast milk, and you can be giving unwittingly, you are giving higher levels of all sorts of toxic stuff to the baby. It's in your breast milk. So just a consideration, something that we work with, something we help people through, but it just is a reality. Now, some of this research, we're going to talk about the brain for a second. So 2025 study in Nature Medicine by researchers at University of New Mexico that found that microplastic concentrations in human brain tissue were significantly higher than in the liver or kidney. And that's bad. That's really bad. It's one thing to have those in the liver and kidneys because those are damaging your main detox organs, but to have it inside of your brain, it's really hard to get things into the brain, and it's really hard to detox stuff out of the brain. Brain has its own special security systems, gates, a blood-brain barrier. Although nanoplastics, things that are extremely tiny, they have an easier time to slip through. And if it's in the blood, well, blood is delivered up to the brain as well. But a lot of these toxins, plastics and other things, like why are they getting up into the brain? Do they have some affinity for it? Well, the short answer is kind of yeah, they actually do. A lot of poisons that we see or modern day toxins are what we call lipophilic. Lipo meaning fat, and philic or philia meaning loving. So they are fat loving. That means that they prefer fat tissue. They have an affinity for getting in and being sequestered into fat tissue. So part of that, when we see people get nice tires on their stomach or big guts, or they get overweight, a lot of times that's not simply just having an excess of calories. It's toxic. It's toxins being deposited in that tissue because they aren't getting detoxed, and sequestering those toxins in fat tissue is, you could say, kind of like a safe way to kind of sweep it under the rug until we can deal with it later. And the brain happens to be what? It's a very fatty organ. I think it's 60% fat, and a quarter of that is cholesterol. So you do need cholesterol. But the fact that it's up in the brain, that's going to cause a lot of problems in the brain's communication signals, in its electrical signaling, in its chemical signaling, just in its makeup in general, because plastic's not supposed to be there. Plastic, even though you could say it's inert, it's not conductive like a heavy metal, and it's not immediately, well, I was going to say it's not immediately oxidative or inflammatory as the way that some biotoxins are. I mean, we could debate on that, but the point is, it has no business being up there, and it's going to cause a lot of hiccups in the brain's ability to function and fire correctly, and not only in the brain but also in the nervous system. And so we talk about brain samples from 2024 contained approximately 50% more plastic by weight than samples collected from 2016. So there's a 50% increase in how much stuff that was found over an 8-year period. The primary plastic was polyethylene, and that's the most common plastic that's used in the world. Well, it's not surprising. So we've also got the cardiovascular system, which is going to be just as bad, and considering that's still the number one killer in America. Um, let's see here. So we're talking about the plaque that had the 4.5 times higher, or 4.5 times higher risk with a heart attack. I'm just looking to see if there's actually any more information on this that we could glean. So those whose plaque contained microplastics had 4.5 times higher risk of heart attack, stroke, and death over the following 2 years compared to those whose plaque was plastic free. Okay. And this is one of the first studies to directly link microplastic accumulation in human tissue to measurable clinical outcomes. Okay, great. Glad to see that your Western medicine community is seeing measurable clinical outcomes, because that's where we're going with this. How do we get better outcomes for people as we get, how do we get the toxins out, and do people feel better when we get the plastics out of their body? Spoiler alert, they do feel better. The body works a lot better when it doesn't have a bunch of plastic crap inside of it. So we're going to hit on what some research has shown as far as the body systems and where they've been detected. So we just talked about the cardiovascular, now the brain and the nervous system. Still, plastics seem to be detected in brain tissue overall at higher concentrations than any other organ. And nanoplastics, as I mentioned earlier, they do cross the blood-brain barrier, and they can activate what's called microglial inflammation. Microglial cells up here in the brain cause a lot of inflammation. And when we have inflammation in the brain, it can manifest as a lot of things. It can manifest as behavioral disorders, learning disorders, cognitive disorders. So people that can't manage their emotions, people that display low IQ, people that display things like obsessive compulsive disorders, depression, anxiety, any other behavioral, mental, or neuropsychiatric condition could simply be a manifestation of brain inflammation derived from microplastics, and then also the infections or the microbes that could attract that the plastics and other poisons are attracting, which is causing further inflammation. So when we think of autism, we think of pandas. Um, we think of stealth infections like streptococcal, um, spinal meningitis. Trying to think of all the other ones. So we lose staph. Well, staph, EBV, Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus. Whatever these viruses are. Not going to get into that tonight. But there's something that's there. So when you start hearing anything about stealth infections or inflammation that involves the brain or the nervous system, you've really got to start asking yourself, well, what is the toxic burden? Do we have plastics in there? Do we have mold in there? That can certainly cause its own problem. And usually, yeah, it's in there. Just to what degree? Because when we start talking about the lab tests, I'll just tell you right now, we find unacceptable levels of plastics and other poisons, and PFAS, the forever chemicals, in everybody. No one's clean. It's unfortunate. It's unfortunate. Now, in the gut, the digestive system, I mentioned before, this will disrupt the microbiome. This will damage the intestinal lining. So it doesn't just irritate the microbiome, it actually causes damage, inflammation, uh, leaky gut, which would be increased intestinal permeability. And then reduces the beneficial bacteria, which is really bad because you need microbiome diversity. You need the right strains to be at the right levels. Not merely being present, but being present at the appropriate levels, because gut health is all about the right populations of the right bacteria. Now, the endocrine system, which is your hormones, doesn't get talked enough about, and I really can't stress enough that plastics mimic hormones. So, phthalates and bisphenols in plastics specifically are endocrine disruptors. And they're associated with disrupting the thyroid, with estrogen dominance, and reduced testosterone. Okay, how many women have a thyroid issue? How many men have a thyroid issue? Because that's also a thing. Women are much more likely to have thyroid problems, but men are getting them as well. Men and women both are getting like basement levels of testosterone without significant illness to show there, but the testosterone is just in the gutter. And there's a reason for that. And part of it is plastics, they're everywhere. And then estrogen dominance, as I mentioned, many of these endocrine disrupting chemicals, they're estrogen mimickers. So no surprise that estrogen might appear higher. Now, reproductive, you're finding plastics in the testicles, in the ovaries, in the placenta, and it's associated with declining sperm counts and fertility challenges. Fertility issues, people can't get pregnant. It's become such a big thing now that you've got the government getting involved with helping to fund IVF, in vitro fertilization. Think about all of the ovarian cysts, PCOS, endometriosis, all of these things. You think that plastics maybe are playing a role inside of there? Ladies, we're going to talk about this for just a second. What are you sticking up there? Think about all your feminine hygiene products and how they're not natural. What are they made out of? I mean, if you buy like 100% organic cotton tampon, you're going to spend a lot of money on that. Chances are you're buying something that is a synthetic type of cloth that has been bleached to death, and you're sticking that in your nether regions and wondering why you're getting continual UTIs because you're putting a bunch of toxic junk into your vaginal canal, which is going to travel upstream into the ovaries, into the uterus, And at the same time, it's going to be annoying, compromising, killing off the good bacteria. That can go same way with certain lubricants or other stuff that gets in there. Just saying. And then one thing that we don't talk about enough, but it's important, is the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is your sewer system of your body. Wherever you're getting plastics or you're getting inundated from plastics, they're eventually going to filter into that sewer system. And those lymph nodes are going to swell if you are not able to get drainage to open in your body. Everything is going to flood into that lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is going to get super toxic, and then the body is going to start flooding the lymph system with water to try to dilute the poison. And what happens when you put water in? You get bloating, you get edema, you get swelling, you get puffy, and you start to kind of look like that girl from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory that turns blue. You start to puff up. So it's getting everywhere. It really is. And then lastly, we also have respiratory. Can't forget about the lungs because they definitely get into there because you're inhaling microfibers that are accumulated in the lung tissue, and it does have associations with pulmonary inflammation and increased cancer risk. That's nice. That's nice. I would definitely say that microplastics have an association with cancer. I mean, any type of toxic thing can be associated with cancer, and because it's going to anything that suffocates the body's cells from being able to use oxygen, like cellular respiration, and if you starve the cell and you starve the mitochondria, it can't use oxygen. It's going to start fermenting sugar. And that's an emergency backup program built in the cell. But if it goes on long enough, and the immune system is not able to tag and remove those cells that are becoming cancerous, because that does happen in your body probably even every day. I mean, cancer is just a normal part of the body, but the immune system is supposed to take care of it. Well, if that goes on for long enough, then it's going to create problems. And plastics can create all sorts of inflammation. They can help starve oxygen out of the body, and they can make the body unable to use oxygen efficiently. As we just mentioned with respiratory, if you have a lot of plastics that damage your lungs' ability to properly take in oxygen, then you can't oxygenate your tissues. That's going to force your cells to starve for oxygen, and they're going to start running on a lactic acid or sugar fermentation. You're not going to get any energy out of it. You get 4 ATP as opposed to 32, and it's setting up really bad downstream effects in your body. So plastics, directly and indirectly, have a lot of problems on the human body. Now, I'm going to hit really quickly on how we're driving inflammation and chronic illness. I've kind of touched on this bit by bit, but we're going to kind of hit this directly. So, we need to understand how our immune system responds to these foreign particles. So, when a particle enters the body that's not recognized or can't be broken down when it enters tissues, the immune system is going to be called in. It's going to mount a response. So the immune system sends inflammatory signals. Specifically, these molecules called cytokines are going to come to the area. And this is the same process that can drive redness and swelling. Like, if you get it around a splinter, you've heard cytokines, like a cytokine storm that happens with mast cells, or, with the whole thing with, people taking clot shot and whatnot, having all these cytokine storms. You know, it's similar to that. So cytokines are called to the area, and as we mentioned before, microplastics don't really break down, so it's kind of like a splinter that can't get removed. They're very persistent, and so the immune response will end up becoming persistent. And that chronic low-grade inflammation, actually, you're just creating a chronic low-grade inflammation. And this can be a common thread that kind of runs through every single major illness today. Remember, it's chronic. It doesn't go away. There's a low grade inflammation that says, well, there's some inflammation coming from somewhere, but we don't know what it is and we don't know why it's there. Well, that's why we're talking about this because we're going to help you figure out where it is and then how to start getting rid of it. So, here's some of the mechanisms in which it works. We talked about physical irritation, we call it tissue damage. So, these particles have irregular, jagged edges, and when they kind of get into a tissue, whether it's your arterial walls or your lung tissue, your intestinal lining, they're going to cause all sorts of damage. They're going to damage that cellular machinery. And that's going to trigger ongoing inflammation as the body either tries to wall it off or it tries to move the foreign material. And that's very important. I said wall off. What do you think a cyst is or a tumor? It's the body quarantining. Now, whether it's like a calcium shell or does other things, um, just kind of think of it in terms of that. So again, thinking about okay, if we're walling off something, if the immune system's walling something off, what does that put in? Endometriosis or polycystic kidney disease, PCOS, polycystic ovarians. Just trying to get you guys to connect the dots. Maybe there's a correlation there. It could be something else. We find parasites that get stuck in these cysts as well, but plastics, environmental chemicals could easily be in there or could be the reason themselves. So we got chemical toxicity. So, I mentioned the phthalates, the bisphenols, the flame retardants, the heavy metals that leach out of these plastic particles. Again, not only will they disrupt the hormones, but they're also going to interfere with other things like insulin signaling, so they can affect your metabolic signal. So the fact that their chemical compound in general can not only mimic other uh, other hormones, but they can also disrupt like the receptor sites of things, and so we kind of get that chemical toxicity from there. Um, Also, the gut microbiome disruption. I already talked about that one earlier, so I'll just do a quick recap. That your microbes, it's their home inside of your body, and when you put poison in there, they're going to respond. They're going to try to break it down. They're going to change their form. They're going to change their function, and they're going to try to metabolize it. And a lot of times that causes them to create a bunch of toxic byproducts instead of creating beneficial byproducts that you absorb. Case in point, in your digestive tract, a lot of nutrients don't actually come from your food. They come from what mm, the bugs that live in your body create um, a lot of the nutrients that we need. They eat the food that we eat, and then they poop out. I mean, I guess that's probably the most blunt way to put it. Special types of vitamins, nutrients, enzymes, and stuff that then are absorbed by our intestinal tract. So we don't get all of our nutrients from our food. We get some, if not a lot of our nutrients from the bugs that live in us, what they produce. So when we start killing them off with toxic plastics, we don't get the beneficial nutrients that we need. And a lot of times we get a lot of neurotoxins, excitotoxins, all sorts of toxic stuff. And it's one reason why we feel so bad. Also, they penetrate the blood-brain barrier, like the nanoplastics. They've been shown in multiple studies across the blood-brain barrier. That's a protective filter that normally prevents most toxins from entering into the brain tissue. And then once they're inside there, they will activate the brain's immune cells, the microglia, and they'll trigger neuroinflammation. And so this, as I mentioned, is kind of like a plausible mechanic for these rates of cognitive problems we have and the accelerating rate of your different types of dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or what have you. And then one final thing we didn't talk about, and that is oxidative stress and DNA damage. So microplastics can generate reactive oxygen species, or ROS for short. These are what we call free radicals. You probably heard that term, free radicals. It's oxidative damage. It's not good. So oxidative stress with damaged cell membranes, the mitochondria, and the DNA. The membrane is important because the membrane is what allows things to get into the cell and it allows things to get out of the cell, such as toxic waste. So if you damage your ability to bring stuff in, move traffic in and out, that cell can't really do much. And then if you damage the mitochondria is what makes energy. If there's no energy being made, can't do anything. And then the DNA itself. You damage the DNA, you're going to get wrong instructions. Things are not going to get built right. Things are not going to get signaled right. And so that's going to accelerate aging, cellular aging, and that's going to increase cancer risk because you get toxicity, you get lack of oxygen that can either be utilized or brought in, and you get DNA damage. Those are all cancer risks. And so the American Cancer Society even noted in 2025 that emerging research links microplastics to DNA damage and disrupted immune surveillance. Like I just said earlier, the immune system is supposed to be surveilling any cells that kind of look like they may go cancerous, both of which are prerequisites for cancer development. Okay. So I think we've probably beaten the plastic issue to death. We know it's a problem. Some of y'all know all of these things already. Some of y'all are just getting into this. So just know plastics are no joke. They're convenient, but they do come at a cost. And we're definitely not going to be getting rid of plastics. Even if we stop doing them today, they are persistent in the environment and they're going to be poisonous long after they're no longer used. So the solution is not to try to necessarily avoid it because it's going to be a bit of a fool's errand. We've got to get our body to be able to clear out more than we take in. And I see we got a question here. Can we trust the BPA free containers that they don't have microplastics? It's a really good question. One thing that I'm sure most of y'all listening will probably be aware of is the fact that companies will stretch the truth to like wicked distortions. I was talking to my wife about this the other day with food labeling and just how dishonest and like you get millions that get paid in research and psychology and ways to spin and twist something words in order to get people to think a certain way, and we can tell it's dishonest. What I mean by that, we'll just talk about the BPA thing. So BPA, yes, now that people are starting to get wise to it, they're saying we don't want to buy BPA. Okay, so companies will say, okay, we're going to take that out, but we still want to keep the same profit margin for our package, for our product. Like, okay, so let's use BPS. BPS is even worse than BPA, but they can market and say it's a BPA free can. But is it being made with another toxin? A lot of times, yeah, it is. And a lot of times you just end up having to trust the company. So it's important for you not only to do your own research on the companies you purchase from, but you're going to have that level of trust. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes it's easy. Like as a practitioner, I have a high degree of confidence in the products that I use. I know these people. I know the standards that they don't have to do, but they choose to. We have the case in point. We have things like CGMP, NSF, Wildcrafted. Organic label does have it does have some weight, but there are plenty of other things that are much higher quality standards. And then we also get certificates of authenticity that regularly come up for batches. Now, unfortunately, you can't get that with a lot of the products that you buy today. And so where I'm going with all of this is when it comes to food, when it comes to things that you buy regularly. When the public gets wise about something and they demand change, unfortunately, a lot of times companies are going to give the appearance of change, and they've either changed to something that's just as bad or like marginally better where it's negligible, or they actually switch it to something worse in the case of BPA being switched to BPS. um, what I was talking with my wife about is when you first had GMO stuff come out, people got wise to that, and so you started seeing labels being put. It's a bioengineered product or bioengineered ingredient. Trying to think of the other terms that they use for it, because like every time the population gets wise to it and they quit buying, companies going to lose revenue and say, okay, we gotta do something. And usually it's never the right thing. It's usually never, hey, give us a better quality product without so much poison in it. It's just, how can we reword this so they think that we've gotten better? Let's use all natural. All natural doesn't have any legal standing. There's nothing that the act there's no criteria that it has to hit in order to be labeled all natural. Organic at least does. There are certain prerequisites that must be met before something can be labeled organic, or there will be fines. Ugh. Anyway, so let's finally get to it. Let's talk about what you can do. First off, the things you can do is test for it. There's a test that y'all have heard me talk about a lot. I love it. Total tox burden. Actually, we have a new version of that now that includes the PFAS, the forever chemicals. It's called the Toxin Zoomer. And you can find the Toxin Zoomer on our website, beyonddetox.com. We have a link where you can go to our lab store and order it for yourself. And I will be sitting down with you for a full hour education session, or if we have to go a little bit over. But it is a full education session that teaches you, how to interpret the lab, what's going on. Those are fairly easy. They'll tell you if you've got it, how bad is it, and then we can use that to correlate with your symptoms, and also we can run those tests again later after doing protocols to see where you're at. And we always see people get much better scores the next time around. It is a very cutting edge test. Unfortunately, you don't have doctors, at least in the regular medical system that I'm aware of, are using it. It just doesn't get the attention. It's not diagnostic in nature. So, but it is very useful because it can actually tell you, do you have a poison in your body that you would otherwise not know? And that's very relevant, especially when it comes to things like not just plastics, but we look at things like pesticides. We look at glyphosate. We look at atrazine. The chemicals turning the frogs gay. That's atrazine. We measure that. We test for that. The mold toxins that wreck people's lives. We test for all of that. And so I just can't express how important a test like this is, because you're learning information you never would have known about your body, and we're actually identifying the root causes that drive so much of all of the health challenges we have today. It really is that important. There's other tests that we can do as well, but they don't touch on the plastics. They're kind of roundabout. Your regular blood work, unless I'm missing something, you're just not going to get any clue. You're not going to get any clue whatsoever about a toxic burden like plastics from your standard blood work, or even your fancier blood work. I work with a lot of HRT clinics that do comprehensive testing for full thyroid, full hormones, and some other inflammatory markers outside your CBC and CMP. But you're really not going to know how bad toxins, specifically plastics, are affecting you unless you're doing some testing like this. We also do have some toxin genetics that you can look at too to see if there's any current problems with your ability to detoxify, from your genetic standpoint. Um, but those are really the big things there. So we can at least identify, how bad things are. But the real work comes into is when you start to get the stuff out of your system. And I'm going to pull up, um, what am I going to do here? Let me see if I want to try to pull up some of the supplements that we recommend for this. Because a lot of this detox work, there's going to be two stages of it. There is the basic detoxification, in that we've got to get your liver, your kidneys, your intestines actually working, rehabilitated, or working as at best capacity as we can get them to, because they're the ones that are kicking out, they're eliminating and removing these microplastics. And so for that, we use different herbal combinations, whether it's things like milk thistle, burdock root, solidago, gynostemma, tudka, um, zeolites, and other types of biofilm breakers, stuff that helps clear out the intestinal tract, rehabilitate the kidney's ability to filter, and the phase one, phase two, and phase three of liver detoxification. I have my favorites, and I use them with great effect. I'm very partial to using Cellcore Biosciences for this stuff. And then we have some specific tools that we'll use, binders. Now, you've probably heard me talk about binders a lot in the past. Binders, as their name suggests, a classification of supplement that is able to bind onto and either neutralize or pair with and safely remove it from the body. They are not all created equal. Many binders only stay in the gut, they can't circulate into the tissues. My favorites are Cellcore binders. We have a few different types that we use. For plastics in particular, I like to use two. One is called HMET. It's an abbreviated name for heavy metals and environmental toxins. Works really great, and it gets in everywhere. So it can pass through the intestinal tract and get systemic. It can also pass the blood-brain barrier, get up in here and bind these poisons, and it doesn't create an ionic bond, which is a weak bond. It creates a covalent bond, and that sucker's not getting broken. So we can neutralize these toxins, carry them all the way out safely till they can get detoxed. And let's see what else that we have here. In general, if you can get your body's drainage pathways, and I say drainage pathways, I'm talking about defecation, urination, respiration, and perspiration. So sweating, breathing, urine, and stool. If you can get all of those opened up, and then you're able to start flushing out the liver and the kidneys, nourishing them, restoring their capacity to detoxify, what's going to happen is that's going to start cleaning out the lymphatic system. So the lymphatic system can't drain when the liver and kidneys are plugged up, clogged, and working at very low capacity. So it's kind of like a funnel. We work at the very bottom, that colon, the liver, the kidneys, and then we start working our way up into the lymphatic system, and that starts cleaning out all of these cellular fluids like a drain. And then that starts cleaning up the cells, because now the cells are not swimming in disgusting fluid. It's clean water. They can detox into it. And then that allows us to go up even higher, because that allows the brain to start detoxing into the general lymph, which allows that to detox into the kidneys and the liver and in the intestines, and then it's in the toilet. But again, microplastics, they're very persistent, they're hard to break down, and they damage anything that they touch. So having something on board like a binder and doing specialized protocols where we are actively flushing out the liver, And then taking things like special probiotics, certain types of probiotics will actually help to break down these very persistent plastics. Again, Cellcore did a really good job with this. We'll use a combo of enzymes and their probiotics, CT-zyme and CT-biotic, and they work great for doing a few things in the intestinal tract. The enzymes work systemically as well, but together they work really great at breaking down biofilms that a lot of these plastics, as well as a lot of infections, get caught in. And it's like a mask that, or it's like a barrier that cloaks them from the immune system. So the immune system can't see them. So when we start using certain supplements that can break down biofilm, that also is another piece of the puzzle. So, as I mentioned, we've got your basic drainage principles. There are plenty of good supplements that are out there. I'm partial when it comes to detoxing a lot of these toxins like plastics. I like using Cellcore. It seems to do the job really, really, really well. We also carry them in our store, and you can't get them anywhere else because they are a practitioner specific formula. There are some other ones that we have in there too. You know, our online store is curated, so it's only using the things that we are very familiar with and trust and see results with. So you're not having to guess, well, which one is better? Why would I get this one over this one? You know, whatnot? Because there's a lot of supplements out there that um, I don't want to say that they're bad. I just want to say that you need the right tool for the job. And when it comes to detoxification, especially with something as serious as like these persistent plastics, the tools really matter. So you got drainage, you got binders. I think a binder is pretty much a non-negotiable. I really like HMET. We also use carboxy, but carboxy is something that we don't ever start people off with immediately because it's not friendly. It's very, very intense because it's a concentrated binder, but it'll get stuff out. It'll definitely get stuff out, and your poop will smell like a chemical factory. It's disgusting, but well, like we say, better out than in. Then we'll do other things like probiotics. I'm partial to spore biotics. I know that research shows like lactobacillus, but there's a lot more to probiotics than I think the mainstream gets hit with. I know there's one right now people keep talking about eat a lot of kimchi and that helps detoxify plastics. Like, yeah, that's great. Sure, it works, but we got some stronger stuff, I think. So we like things, Microbiome Labs, Megaspore Biotic. We have that clinic. Reach out to us if you want to get, you know, if you're partial to that or if you've heard about that because they're very good. But we don't have that one on the store. We have to order that one. But we have the CT Biotic, the CT Zyme. We also have another one called Proflora from Biocide and Botanicals or Biocide and Research, whatever the company's called. um, but they also all have something in common. They're spore based, and spore based probiotics are very interesting in that they don't stay in the body. They're transient. They survive digestion, so they're much lower count than your standard probiotics, but they make a huge difference in rehabilitating the microbiome. And then we'll pair that with enzymes as well in order to help further break down, um, whatever doesn't need to be in there. So we use that for biofilm busting. We can pair that with some parasitic formulas as well, and then some minerals too that can also break down biofilms. So again, I may be getting a little too deep into it now, but just know there are a lot of tools out there to address this issue. Your body does have the ability, the capacity to detox this stuff, but the body's is so under stress, it's so overburdened with things now that a lot of times it needs a lot of extra help. It really needs strong kind of 21st century tools in order to fix these 21st century problems. And we don't want you feeling sick or getting half measures and then feeling terrible through the process, like having detox reactions that are unnecessary because you can get the plastics kind of unlodged, then they trickle down and then they get stuck again. And then you start having all sorts of problems, whether it's breakouts, rashes, brain fog, um, or in worst cases, tremors, slurred speech, heart palpitations, a lot of that stuff. A lot of those symptoms can just be signs that you're not detoxing properly. And that's what we're all about here is we want to be able to get this stuff out as safely and as effectively as possible so that you can actually heal. So I hope that you guys got a lot out of this tonight. I'll check and see if we've got any other questions. If not, we'll go ahead and end it here. Like I said, that's a pretty big deep dive on microplastics, but at least you know you can do something about it. There's plenty of tools that are out there. Research them. Reach out to us if you have any questions. Support at beyonddetox.com. And like I said, I would probably suggest trying to work with somebody if you're really going to try to tackle this stuff because these toxins are no joke. They cause a lot of deep chronic persistent illnesses, and if you're going to do it, I want you to do it right. Hi guys, y'all be well. Y'all be safe. I will be back here next week, same time, Friday, 7 p.m. Check us out at beyonddetox.com. You can check out all of our news, all of our articles. And actually, since I said that, I'm just going to show y'all really quickly. I've been working on this. I'm really glad to show this off to y'all. Because if you do like information and you want to keep learning a little bit more, I've got just the thing for you. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and show you the new thing that we've been working on. Okay, great. So now y'all can see this is our website, beyonddetox.com. Now, if you go up here to education and click on articles, you will see we've got a whole repository of different articles. So we've got information on our protocols. We've got information on what I talked about tonight. I just made a post about this, microplastics. And then actually, if we just go through here, I've got a lot of things listed by category. So things from autoimmune, bone health, brain health, detox, gut health, et cetera, et cetera. And there's many more here. And you can always search the articles. In this case, I'll just type in binder, how to rebuild your microbiome after antibiotics and whatnot. So if you go to these things, you check on here, we have all this information by topic. And then even at the bottom, we'll have recommendations with links to certain things that we use, protocols, tools, and then any of our functional lab testing so that you can get a better idea of how to approach these issues yourself. And as always, I'm here. I'm still seeing new people. So if you're interested in working with me, then just click on up there at the top of that orange button, work with me, and fill that out. Free 20-minute consultation. We'll be glad to answer any questions, see if you're a good fit for us, and then get you to have an initial appointment. And I'll put together a personalized protocol for you from there. So you don't have to go about this alone. And you don't have to be suffering needlessly with health problems that you have the power to improve yourself. So, again, you guys have a great night. Check out our website, check out our articles, and I'll be here next Friday at 7 p.m. Central.